My mind had fractured slowly, bit by bit, into chaotic shards, tiny, shrieking fragments of confusion. I remember entire days spent lying in bed, unmoving, my body hollow of hunger, my eyes fixed on the ceiling above. I remember the whispering shadows that slithered through the corners of my vision, always just beyond reach. But more than anything, I remember the voices, constant, ceaseless, screaming at me. My mother's voice above them all. That piercing, unhinged wail. "Wet your bed again, and I'll cut it off," she shrieked, her voice slashing through the silence. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, rattling the walls, shaking the ceiling. But I was alone. I was still in my bed, no one else there. Some small, logical part of me recognized that. Yet her voice still filled the room, feral, ragged, shrill. A voice I had known all my life. A voice that had long since embedded itself into my mind like a splinter that would never come loose. I remember the first time she caught me stealing, just a child with sticky fingers and a hunger for something sweet. A single piece of candy was all it took. She dragged me, kicking, pleading, sobbing, into the kitchen. I still see the way her hands moved, the way she flicked the burner on, the blue flame roaring to life. "This will teach you," she hissed, her grip ironclad around my tiny wrist. And then she forced my hand down. The scream I let out that day never faded. It still lingers, trapped in the corners of time, echoing across the years. Sometimes, even now, I hear it. The sound of the door downstairs clicked. The handle rattled. My body went rigid beneath the blankets, frozen in place, stiff as stone. The ceiling above me seemed to ripple and stretch, expanding into something unreal. A jagged, ragged tear spread open, at least 7 feet across, revealing something on the other side. A world impossibly bright. Rolling green hills, endless and vibrant, stretched into the horizon. Rainbows arched through a brilliant sky. Clouds swirled in delicate, wispy formations. A paradise. But I remained in the filth of this decaying place, my flesh rotting in the dim, sour air, my surroundings littered with garbage and dishes left to fester, the squirming of larvae writhing atop them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A rush of figures entering the room, police officers, paramedics, their gazes sharp, scanning the wreckage of my existence with a practiced detachment. But alongside them, the shadow figures lurked, skittering along the walls, writhing at the edges of perception. The hands that grabbed me, some were flesh, warm and firm, others cold as the void itself. I couldn't tell which was which. My gaze lifted, drawn back toward the opening above, its golden glow beckoning. A strange lightness took hold. I felt myself drifting, my body slipping away, my spirit rising toward the land of eternal sun, of endless blue skies, of honeyed warmth and tranquility. Below, my body remained, the shattered husk of me, the shadows coiled around it, slithering over my slackened limbs, my broken, useless shell. But I had escaped. I had slipped through their grasp, fled beyond their reach. As I ascended, I saw them working together, paramedics and shadow beings, lifting my body, carting it away. But it no longer mattered. They could take what was left. I was free, free from the grasp of something worse than death itself. Time lost all meaning. I wandered in this place of perpetual golden light, of endless streams, of forests stretching beyond the horizon. But sometimes I would glance back. The opening still followed behind me, a window into the world I had left behind. I saw my body, just meat now, resting in a room far different than the one I had known. Clean, sterile, orderly. The men in white coats stood around me, their faces impassive. The shadow figures were still there, still clawing at the walls, still slinking across the room like living oil slicks. They touched me, ran their razor-like fingers over my flesh, tracing patterns unseen. Others thrashed at the doctors, their attacks leaving no physical wounds. Their touch was something else, something deeper, something worse. More like radiation than pain. I had seen what it did before. If one reached into a person's body, dragged its blade-like fingers over their liver, that person would wither within months, their insides betraying them. The doctors never saw, never understood. But I did. I had always understood. They had done it to me too, torn through me, piece by piece, each time something was lost. Each time I felt myself unravel further, slipping further away. I turned from the sight, nausea curling in my gut. I tried to move forward, back toward the rolling hills, the golden sky, the warmth. But something had shifted. The endless paradise no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a cage. I was alone, trapped in this perfect, endless world. The same trees, the same sky, the same roads stretching into eternity. It was beautiful, but it never changed, never ended. Perhaps this was hell. Perhaps instead of fire, it burned with monotony, with isolation. A prison disguised as paradise. The voice of a man pulled me back toward the window, back toward the opening that refused to leave me. A severe case of catatonia, one of them said, his voice clinical, detached, with catalepsy and mutism. A man in glasses nodded, glancing down at my body with a look that held no real emotion. Prior diagnosis of schizophrenia, but it's clearly progressed to something much worse. And any history of catatonia? A bald man in a white coat asked. The man with glasses shook his head. None. No reports of mutism or waxy flexibility. No symptoms like this before. There was a pause, a sigh. Then, well, he's not responding to the current medication. We'll move forward with electroconvulsive therapy. Continue the feeding tube. Keep monitoring. The bald man jotted something down, then asked, and the official diagnosis? Withdrawn catatonia, the other responded, scribbling notes onto his clipboard. Severe, resulting from untreated paranoid schizophrenia. The words felt distant, meaningless. I was no longer there. They were talking about the husk I had left behind, the thing they had placed in their pristine, white-walled prison. We'll need to get an involuntary commitment signed by a judge, the man with glasses added. Tell the nurses to prepare an extra bed in psych. He's not going anywhere. The next few days passed in a blur. Before I woke, I watched them wheel my body into a sterile room filled with machines. They placed a robin's egg blue mouthguard between my teeth, its breathing hole the only thing allowing air in. A cold gel smeared across my forehead before circular electrodes were pressed onto my skin. Shadowy figures drifted around me, laughing in silent amusement, dancing in the periphery of my vision. They claimed ECT patients were given drugs to keep them asleep, but I saw everything from the other side. Maybe there are things in existence that even doctors refuse to acknowledge. I watched my body convulse violently as electricity surged through it. The force of it tore me away from the strange dream world I'd been inhabiting, and I plummeted down into myself. I saw my body, thin, pale, motionless, like a corpse left out too long. As I merged back into it, I swore I could hear the laughter of the shadow people ringing in my ears. A groan slipped from my lips as my eyes snapped open. Time had passed. How much? I had no way of knowing. I was no longer in that clinical room with its sterile smell, the doctors with unsettlingly wide smiles, or the violent surges of electricity forcing my body to obey. I was somewhere else entirely. Pain shot through every nerve in my body, sharp stabs radiating from my spine as I struggled to sit up. The room was dim, the walls bare concrete, pressing in on me with their cold, suffocating presence. I blinked rapidly, forcing my vision to adjust to the faint light streaming in through a window. Metal bars crisscrossed the glass, and beyond it, the sky burned with deep crimson hues. Sunset or sunrise, I couldn't tell. Razor wire stretched out in neat rolls beyond the window, slicing against the bloody glow. Stumbling from the cot, I grabbed the door and yanked it open. A harsh, flickering fluorescent light flooded the space, replacing the suffocating grayness of my cell with a stuttering, erratic glow. The hallway was empty, eerily silent. Shadows leapt and danced against the walls, morphing with each flicker of the dying bulbs. Not a soul in sight. Abandoned medical carts lined the hallway, their contents scattered in haphazard disarray. Bloodied scalpels and knives lay atop one, as though hastily discarded in the middle of something unspeakable. Drawers had been torn open, some yanked so violently that they dangled from their hinges. One sat at an odd angle, its contents spilling onto the floor. A collection of severed fingers, meticulously lined up like grotesque hot dogs, their edges dried and dark. The floor was a wasteland of used needles, shattered bricks, and crumbled cement. Dark, wet stains painted erratic patterns across the surface, and something more solid lay amongst them, a liver, if my horrified brain had to guess. Flies buzzed in thick clouds around the decaying remains, the stench of rot hitting me all at once. My stomach lurched violently. I stumbled backward, barely able to keep the bile from rising as my breath hitched in my throat. My watering eyes darted back toward the room I'd woken up in, searching for anything that might make sense of where I was. That's when I noticed it. A sign. It hung above the cot, nearly blending into the wall. Layers of dust and old nicotine stains obscured it, but as I stepped closer, I could just make out the words beneath the filth. Rules for patients in Whiting Psychiatric Hospital. 1. Do not leave doors open. That invites them in. 2. If you must enter the key room, leave before the guard notices. 3. An offering of raw meat is required to pass between stairwell levels. I stared at the sign, waiting for the punchline. Some kind of twisted joke, maybe a prank with hidden cameras recording my reaction. But nothing happened. The room remained unchanged. Concrete walls, a thin mattress, the pulsing, erratic glow from the hallway beyond. The cold realization settled over me. This was real. A shiver crept down my spine. My gaze shifted to the open door, unease curling in my chest. Something was there. Just beyond the threshold, in the flickering half-light, I caught a glimpse of movement. A pale face, wide-eyed and grinning, peeking around the corner. My heart clenched. The fluorescent lights buzzed and hummed, their erratic strobe casting the hallway into eerie, shifting darkness. Hello? My voice barely rose above a whisper as I inched toward the door. Is someone? A sound cut me off. A gurgling inhale, wet and rattling. The kind of breath that should never come from living lungs. The sound of dirt and rot clogging a throat that hadn't drawn breath in a long, long time. My pulse slammed against my ribs, hammering in my ears. Ducks. The voice slithered through the darkness, rasping my name with a broken, choking gasp. More ragged breaths followed, echoing down the corridor. I stumbled backward, my mind racing for a plan. A weapon. Anything. My hands grasped at the air, but the room was barren. The bed was bolted down, the pillow far too thin to be of any use against whatever was out there. The medical cart. My thoughts snapped back to the hallway, the scalpels, the scattered instruments. It was my only chance, but to get to it, I had to go through the thing lurking just outside my door. A long, white hand curled around the doorframe. I moved. Bolting for the cart, I forced my legs to propel me forward. The distance, 20 feet at most, felt endless. Behind me, something gurgled. A gasp, wet and urgent. Then it lunged. Cold arms wrapped around my throat, wrenching me back. I barely caught a glimpse, flesh mottled with deep festering sores, bones protruding from thin fingers, something writhing beneath split skin. Its hair, long and matted, fell over my face, and the stench hit me like a brick to the skull. Rot. Decay. A sickly sweet tang of something spoiled long ago. I clawed at its arms, desperate, thrashing. Ducks. It whispered, its icy grip tightening. Give me your warmth. Black dots bloomed in my vision as I fought against it, my lungs burning, my pulse pounding in my skull. I forced myself toward the cart, my fingers stretched, reaching just a little further. If I could get a scalpel, my fingers slipped against its loose, decayed flesh as I tried to gouge at its face. But there was nothing solid, nothing to grab. Then, beyond the creature, I saw them. 3 more figures, pale and impossibly still, limping toward the commotion. Their eyes locked onto me with an eerie, inhuman hunger, like moths drawn to a flame. The moment my eyes locked onto them, I realized they had once been women with long, flowing black hair. But now, they were something else. Something that looked like it had clawed its way out of a nightmare. Deep, jagged gashes tore through their skin, and grotesque, grayish autopsy stitches ran along their chests. They were dressed in faded, light green hospital gowns, the fabric stained with a chaotic mix of fluids, some of which I couldn't even begin to identify. The only one I could say for certain was blood. Too much of it. Their eyes had turned a milky, lifeless hue, the once bright irises now clouded over. Their slow, limping strides brought them closer with each unsteady step, their twitching gazes flicking left and right as if they were searching for something, or someone. I was still too far from the cart, and in that moment I knew I had already lost. My vision darkened at the edges as the fingers around my throat squeezed tighter. Fingers with skin that peeled away in shreds, exposing raw, decayed flesh beneath. The bones of their hands had sharpened into jagged claws, their points burrowing into my neck. I wanted to scream, but my lungs couldn't find a single breath. Then, something massive and fast crashed into us, sending both me and the creature hurtling backward. The strangling grip on my throat vanished as I hit the cold, filthy floor. Dazed, I looked up to see a towering man standing over me. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling in heavy gasps. His dark, wild eyes stared down at the pale, reanimated corpse that had just tried to kill me. I noticed his clothes, standard issue attire from a psychiatric ward, a plain white t-shirt, khaki pants, and soft-soled slippers. Then I looked down at myself, and a chilling realization set in. I was wearing the exact same outfit. Someone had changed me while I was unconscious. The man's face twisted with an unsettling, almost manic intensity. He never took his gaze off me, or the monstrous thing writhing on the floor. In his grip, a long, gleaming buck knife dripped with fresh blood. Without hesitation, he surged forward. I screamed, expecting the blade to come down on me. But he wasn't aiming for me. With a sickening crunch, he drove the knife straight into the undead woman's left eye. The blade sank deep, cracking through bone with a wet, splintering noise. A gruesome, blackish fluid spurted from the wound as her body convulsed violently. Her legs jerked and kicked against the grimy floor, sending shards of broken glass and scattered needles skittering across the tiles. More of that dark, unnatural blood oozed from her skull, pooling around her in a thick, syrupy mess. With a disgusting, suction-like sound, the man yanked the knife free. He wiped the blade against his shirt absent-mindedly before extending one of his enormous, calloused hands toward me. Without thinking, I grasped it, and with inhuman strength, he hauled me to my feet like I weighed nothing. "We need to get out of here," he said, his deep voice flat and emotionless. He didn't wait for a response. With a firm shove, he pushed me forward, forcing me down the dimly lit hallway in the opposite direction of the approaching creatures. They were mere steps away now, their broken bodies moving with eerie determination. Run. My head pounded, and confusion clouded my thoughts, but adrenaline shoved everything else aside. I bolted, my breath ragged as my feet slammed against the linoleum floor. Despite his size, the man was faster, moving with purpose as I struggled to keep up. The corridor split left and right, but he never hesitated. He veered left and shoved open a cracked door just around the corner. The sign above it read, "Janitorial Closet." He yanked me inside, slammed the door shut, and twisted the deadbolt with a sharp click. The room was swallowed in total darkness until he reached up, tugging on a dangling string. A single bare incandescent bulb flickered to life, casting the small space in a weak yellow glow. The man turned toward me and extended his left arm. I hesitated, but when I finally reached out to shake his hand, I immediately regretted it. His grip was crushing, fingers like steel vices threatening to grind my bones to dust. "Freddy," he introduced himself, his voice slow and deliberate. One of his eyes locked onto mine, while the other drifted slightly, unfocused. In his other hand, he still clutched the knife. The blood that dripped from its tip pattered softly against the floor in rhythmic droplets. "You must have a death wish, leaving your door open like that," he muttered. I swallowed hard. "I'm Dax. I just got here. I don't even know what those things are." A faint noise made me stiffen. Something sharp scraped against the other side of the door. My mind conjured an image of those horrific undead women, their rotted claws dragging along the battered wood. I swore I could hear the faintest gurgling breath just inches away. My entire body shuddered. "So, those rules are real," I murmured. Freddy's expression darkened instantly, his face contorting like a storm rolling in. He gave a grim nod, as real and as serious as death. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know who put them up, but they're the only reason I've stayed alive this long. They're in every patient's room." His gaze bore into me. "How did you get here?" I told Freddy about the catatonic state I had been trapped in, the land of eternal sunrise, the shadow people, the electroconvulsive therapy, and the terrifying realization of waking up here. He listened, shaking his head. "There was a lady in my town," he said after a pause. "She had real bad mental problems, like real bad." His expression darkened. "She used to get the same thing too. We had a few statues in Wells downtown. Not much, just a small town. But what town doesn't have a few statues, right?" I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Well," he continued, "this lady used to walk over to them real slow, like she was confused. Almost like a robot that didn't quite know how to use its legs. And once she got near a statue, she would freeze. Sometimes with one arm bent at a perfect 90-degree angle, other times posed like the Statue of Liberty." He let out a short, amused laugh, then shook his head. "She would just stay like that? Forever. Until she either collapsed or died." A cold feeling spread in my gut. "Somebody always had to come and get her," he went on. "A couple of strong guys would pick her up, shove her into the back of a car. When they carried her, it looked like they were carrying an actual statue, stiff as hell, like a mannequin or something. I remember driving through downtown with my family, and there she'd be, just standing there, frozen. My dad would always sigh and say, "Gosh dang it, there's old Becky again doing her rigor mortis routine." Freddie chuckled, but the laughter held something bitter, something hollow. I laughed too, back then, he admitted. But deep inside, something about it made me want to cry. Even as a kid, I knew it wasn't right. Something about it was really, really wrong. I mean, she would literally stand there until she froze to death if no one came for her. I swallowed hard and rubbed at my forehead, exhaustion pressing down on me. "Is there any food or water around? My head is killing me." Freddie nodded. "There's a cafeteria on the ground floor, but we'd have to go through the stairwell. You're on the 3rd floor right now." That word, stairwell, sent a shiver through me. I remembered the rules. I forced a smile. "But we need to feed the elder beast first, right?" Freddie grinned back, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a blood-stained folding knife and held it out to me. "Yeah, first, we can just cut a chunk out of that corpse in the hallway," he said casually, as if discussing dinner prep. His tone was void of emotion, like feeding human flesh to whatever lurked in the stairwell was just another daily chore. He's not so bad, really. Or it, I guess. Not like those things have genders. I hesitated. What does that mean? He just shook his head. "You'll see in a minute." I wasn't sure I wanted to. "Come on," he said, waving me along. "Let's get some water. I could use a drink too. And trust me, you do not want to drink from the sinks in the bathrooms. Last time I did, they started gushing warm, salty blood." He shuddered, his face twisting in disgust. "Damn near threw up. God, it was foul." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Good to know. Thanks for the tip." Freddie unlocked the door, and together we stepped out into the hallway. Back into danger. The body of the undead woman lay sprawled on the floor. A pool of inky blackness seeped from her pale form, spreading like an oil slick. Her milky white eyes stared blankly at the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Freddie cracked his knuckles. "All right, let's do this." I glanced up and down the hallway, my skin crawling. No sign of the wandering corpses. For now. We made sure to close the door tightly behind us. I could only hope that following the rules would be enough to keep those abominations at bay. "A pound of flesh," I murmured under my breath. The hallway was silent, except for the buzzing of the lights. Freddie shot me a strange look. Shakespeare? Apparently, he didn't get the reference. He just shrugged, knelt down, and got to work. "Yeah, the bone's always the hardest part," he muttered, his voice eerily casual, like he was carving a Thanksgiving turkey instead of mutilating a human body. I stood frozen, both horrified and morbidly fascinated as he worked. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed a discarded bedpan, wedged it under her wrist, and stomped down. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the empty hall, sharp as a gunshot. Freddie grinned, satisfied, and picked up the severed hand. "What the hell are you doing?" I finally asked. He looked up, his face blank. "What do you mean?" "I mean, not here, not necessarily," but I hesitated. "Why are you here, Freddie?" His expression darkened. "I killed my girlfriend," he said simply. The words hit like a slap. "She was cheating on me," he continued. "I caught her with the guy, shot them both in the head." His voice was eerily calm, almost detached. I remember tracing my fingers over the exit wounds under the moonlight. They looked so still, so peaceful. His eyes had that faraway, thousand-yard stare. Then, just as suddenly, he exhaled sharply, shaking off the moment. "They found me criminally insane." A beat of silence stretched between us. "I think," he added, hesitating, "the nail in the coffin was." I waited. Finally, he sighed. "The blood." I frowned. "What about it?" "The blood I drank from her body." The words settled like a rock in my stomach. I turned slowly to look at him, searching his face for any sign of a joke. None. "Wait, you..." I could barely get the words out. "You drank her blood?" He nodded grimly. His brown, cross-eyed stare held no emotion, no remorse. "There was a lot happening at the time," he said, rubbing the back of his neck and shifting his weight like a nervous schoolboy. I really thought my heart was giving out. I kept hearing voices and seeing faces in the trees. The voices were always outside, and soon I couldn't tell when people were actually speaking to me because the voices never stopped. They whispered that her blood would fix my heart, that it would undo the damage, make me whole again. So I grabbed a glass, held it under the bullet hole, and I drank it. I did. I won't deny it. Looking back now, I see how sick I was, how wrong I was. Even if she was cheating on me, she didn't deserve to die. But sometimes things get out of control, and when that happens, my mind twists things around. I get confused. I make terrible choices. For the last 7 years, I've been locked away, shuffled from one psychiatric hospital to the next. Some of them kept me underground, where the sun never reached. And then, 3 days ago, a doctor told me I was being transferred. He said I had responded well to my antipsychotics and cognitive behavioral therapy, so they were sending me somewhere with more freedom. They put me in a windowless van and drove for hours. I couldn't see where we were going. A man in a black suit and sunglasses sat in the back with me, silent the entire trip. Then, just before we arrived, he leaned in and said something that made my stomach knot. Remember to follow the rules at Whiting. The danger is real. It's not just in your head. I gave him a weird look, but he just opened the door and motioned for me to get out. That was the first time I saw the building, the one we're in right now. From the outside, it looks like a featureless concrete cube, no windows, just a single entrance. The surface is smooth, gray, lifeless, like some brutalist government facility straight out of 1984. He stopped talking for a moment, tilting his head. Faint, shuffling sounds echoed down the hall. "We should keep moving," he whispered. "It's not safe to stand still here." Without another word, he guided me through a heavy metal door labeled staircase. The air shifted immediately. The stairwell loomed before us, swallowing the light, thick with shadows. My eyes adjusted to the dimness, revealing a steep, switchback staircase that zigzagged downward, vaught landings breaking up the sections. Thin beams of light trickled through cracks in the doors, through holes corroded into the walls. The door behind me started swinging shut, but as it passed through the darkness, I caught sight of something jammed into the wood. 4 bloody slivers. I reached out, fingers brushing the jagged, slightly curved objects. My stomach clenched as realization struck. Fingernails. Someone had clawed at this door in sheer, mindless terror. "Move," Freddy hissed, snapping me out of my trance. "Close that door, now." I didn't hesitate. My pulse hammered as I pushed the door shut. I didn't want to think about what had happened the last time someone left it open. Freddy clutched the severed hand in his fist and started down the steps, moving cautiously, his eyes darting in every direction, up, down, back, like a child checking under the bed for monsters. But here, the monsters were real. A sickening, wet inhale drifted up from below. The sound rattled and gurgled, stretching on for far too long. Freddy's face drained of color, and a primal instinct screamed at me to run, to turn back before I saw what was waiting beneath us. But it was too late. Something flickered in my peripheral vision, a flash of unnatural red. I looked down and caught the briefest glimpse of a rounded, crimson head before it vanished, dissolving into the shadows. But I knew it was stalking us. "Just keep walking," Freddy muttered, voice tight. I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or himself. He stretched the dismembered hand out in front of him, like some kind of protective charm, like it held power against whatever lurked below. Then, the railing quivered under my hand. The silence became too perfect, too heavy, and then the claws wrapped around the metal bar in front of Freddy. My breath hitched. The fingers were long, jagged, sharp as crimson railroad spikes. Something heaved itself upward, moving without a sound, as if gravity itself had no hold on it. I stared, frozen, as a monstrous form emerged, towering over us, bathed in darkness. The Keeper. Its exoskeleton was deep red, the color of congealed blood, smooth and gleaming like polished armor. It stood at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. No eyes that I could see. Just 2 slits for nostrils, snake-like and eerie. Its head jutted forward, angular and predatory, like an eyeless velociraptor. It was something between reptilian and insectoid, an unnatural hybrid that shouldn't exist. Then its jaw unhinged. The stairwell trembled as it released a roar, thunderous, guttural, vibrating through my bones. Drool, thick and metallic, spilled from its maw in silver rivulets. And then I saw them. The teeth, not teeth, spikes. Dozens of jagged, needle-like protrusions filled its mouth, each one as long as my pinky finger, serrated like a deep-sea horror pulled straight from the abyss, like the jaws of a dragonfish, and we were trapped. I stumbled backward, every instinct screaming at me to run, but before I could take another step, the creature's head snapped toward me with unnatural speed. It moved like a machine, precise and mechanical, rather than an animal. It ignored Freddy completely, taking a deliberate step toward me. A low, guttural growl built deep within its chest, resonating through my bones, vibrating through the very stairs beneath us. My breath hitched as I locked eyes with the creature, its sharp fangs lowering as it emitted an eerie clicking noise from its throat. The air between us grew thick with the scent of blood and sulfur, its breath washing over me in waves, but I dared not even blink. Freddy, acting fast, tossed the severed hand between me and the keeper. The creature twitched violently, its head snapping between me and the pale hunk of flesh on the ground. Its jaws clattered as it let out a bizarre, chittering sound, almost like speech in some alien dialect. Then, in an instant, it lunged, seizing the hand with the speed of a toad catching a fly. A sickening crunch followed as its sword-like teeth shredded the flesh and bone, sending a spray of blood outward. Warm droplets splattered against my face, but I didn't dare move. I stood as rigid as a corpse, eyes locked on the monstrosity before me. Behind it, Freddy loomed, his breath heavy, his hands trembling. Beads of sweat rolled down his temples as he clutched his trembling fists. The keeper gave one last deep, clicking growl before leaping onto the railing. With inhuman agility, it scaled the structure in a blur, vanishing from sight. The railing shuddered under its weight, and only when silence settled did I finally exhale. My legs felt weak beneath me as I stepped forward, my body still buzzing with the feeling of standing toe-to-toe with something that should not exist, and somehow surviving. When we reached the first floor, I turned and carefully shut the door behind us, making sure it clicked securely into place. Whatever horrors lurked in that stairwell in those upper floors, I didn't want them following us. Freddy exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "I could use some water after that," he muttered, forcing the barest hint of a smile. But then he added, "Honestly, there are worse things in here than the keeper. I feel like, given enough time, I could probably tame it, like some kind of alien dog." I shot him a look. "Oh yeah? You'd train it with human fingers and hearts when it sits or rolls over?" I deadpanned. Freddy chuckled darkly, but didn't respond. Instead, he quickened his pace as we entered a large room to our left. I practically had to jog to keep up with him. The room was a mess, tables overturned, rotting food smeared across the floor, mold in sickening shades of orange, red, and black spread across surfaces like an invasive jungle, creeping up the walls and ceiling. Then my eyes landed on the corpse. A woman, dressed in the same uniform as Freddy and me, lay in the center of the cafeteria. Blood oozed from a deep wound in her back, pooling beneath her lifeless form. "Oh my God," I breathed. Freddy barely spared her a glance, walking past without hesitation. But then, she moved. A shallow, ragged breath. I lurched forward, heart pounding, flipping her over as she gasped weakly. Her eyes rolled in their sockets, teeth chattering violently. More blood spilled from her wound, staining my hands as I tried to stabilize her. For a moment, she seemed completely lost, her body trembling as she fought for breath. Then, just as suddenly, her gaze found mine. Her eyes flickered between me and Freddy, her lips curling into a weak, almost triumphant smile. "I almost got out," she rasped. Blood bubbled between her teeth. She took a shuddering breath and continued, her words coming in frantic bursts. "The key, it's in the key room. The front door key, it's in the back, hanging on a big black metal chain. But the guard." Her body stiffened. A fresh wave of terror passed through her eyes as memories flooded back. "Oh God, the guard." Her words slurred, her pupils dilating as her body seized violently. Her legs kicked out, fingers curling into claws before, finally, she went still. A long, rattling death gasp escaped her lips, her head lolling limply to the side. I looked up at Freddy, grief and horror twisting in my gut, but beneath it all, something else flickered. Hope. Freddy's eyes were wide, manic with realization. The key room. Of course there's a key for the front door. He let out a wild, almost disbelieving laugh. I wonder who told her where it was? "Let's go get it," I said immediately, my pulse hammering. "After we eat something," Freddy replied, jerking his head toward the kitchen. I scoffed. "You act like this is some simple errand. Do you even know what the guard will do to us if he catches us sneaking around the key room?" Freddy smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Do you think it's some guy with a flashlight? A regular old human security guard?" He let out a sardonic chuckle, shaking his head. "Nothing here is normal." His face darkened. I saw it once, just for a second. And trust me, you'll see for yourself soon enough that thing isn't human. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but my stomach twisted with hunger. The kitchen was nearly barren. The fridges were filled with rotting meat, congealed dairy, and an overwhelming stench that made my eyes water. The only edible thing we found was an old jar of peanut butter, which we devoured in silence. The water had a faintly soapy, off-putting taste, but I was too thirsty to care. I downed cup after cup, barely noticing as Freddy swallowed thickly beside me. "The key room is just down the hall," he finally murmured. His voice was quieter now, more nervous than in the stairwell. "She was right," he muttered. "It's our only chance, the only way past the guard. If we die here, no one will ever know what happened to us." I nodded, but my insides were twisting into knots. My heart thundered as we moved forward, stepping over broken medical carts and shattered glass. Blood-stained knives littered the floor, along with scraps of something far worse. Scattered pieces of skin. They attracted flies. Thick, black, writhing clouds of them. The entire building reeked of decay, a putrid mix of rotting flesh and something even worse. The stench had no doubt clung to my clothes by now, sinking into the fabric like a curse. The key room stood ahead, marked by a large sign. Its wooden door had a small, safety glass window smeared with streaks of blood, a clear handprint standing out against the grime. It wasn't exactly reassuring. As we reached the entrance, Freddy turned to me, his face grim. "In and out, amiga. No messing around," he muttered. "We go straight to the back, grab the key with the big metal chain, and run. If the guard shows up, we split. At least one of us makes it out." I swallowed hard, bending slightly as if the weight of what we were about to do pressed down on me. "I don't know if I can do this, man," I admitted, my voice unsteady. "I'm freaking out. The rules say not to enter the key room, and breaking the rules, it always leads to something bad." Freddy shrugged, his expression unreadable. "We don't have a choice." I let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay, let's do this before I lose my nerve completely." Without hesitation, he pushed open the door, and we slipped inside. Thousands of keys glittered under the dim, flickering lights. The walls were lined with them, endless rows catching the light like tiny daggers. Cabinets divided the massive space, forming narrow paths that stretched all the way to the back. Freddy moved quickly, darting toward our destination. I followed close behind, my head swiveling from side to side, searching for any sign of danger. Nothing. We reached the back wall, our hands sifting through hundreds of keys piled haphazardly on a desk. My eyes locked onto one with a thick, circular steel chain attached. That had to be it. I rushed toward it, and then I saw it. A figure rounded the far corner, moving with eerie precision. It wore the uniform of a night watchman, but it wasn't human. Its face was a smooth expanse of white, devoid of eyes or a nose, with black veins spiderwebbing beneath the skin. And then it grinned, revealing unnaturally long, razor-sharp fangs, dripping with fresh blood. I froze. The creature lifted its hands, palms facing outward, and in the center of each, enormous, unblinking eyes stared back at me. They darted between me and Freddy, the pupils contracting and expanding as if adjusting to the dim light. Then, the eyes blinked. The guard's mouth stretched open, and a shrill, unnatural shriek filled the room. I grabbed the key and ran. Freddy and I split instantly, each bolting down separate paths through the maze of cabinets. My grip on the key tightened, my other hand clutching my knife like a lifeline. Something slammed into me from behind. I flew forward, my body hitting the ground hard. The door was just ahead, tantalizingly close, but the impact had knocked the breath from my lungs. "No!" Freddy's voice cut through the chaos. He rounded the corner, leaping over me in a blur, his knife raised. I rolled onto my back just as the guard loomed over me, its eerie, featureless face inches from mine. Then Freddy struck. His blade plunged deep into the creature's skull. For a split second, it trembled, the knife quivering in place like a leaf caught in the wind. Then it roared. Its hands shot out, grabbing Freddy with terrifying strength. His head snapped back as the fangs in its mouth extended even further, striking like a serpent. They pierced his neck, sinking deep into his flesh. Blood spurted. Freddy's breath turned ragged, a sickening gurgle filling the air. His legs buckled, and his body sagged, but the guard didn't let him fall. It cradled him, almost tenderly, as it fed, drinking every last drop. I scrambled to my feet, my knife forgotten in the chaos. My stomach churned, nausea rising in my throat as I stumbled toward the exit. I had to get out. I sprinted through the door, my legs burning as I pushed forward. The front of the building loomed ahead, and with shaking hands, I shoved the key into the lock. It turned. Sunlight poured in, golden and warm, a stark contrast to the horror I'd left behind. Rolling hills stretched into the distance, untouched by the nightmare inside that place. It took me hours to hitch a ride out of there, but I never forgot the way back. I went to the police, told them everything. They laughed, called me insane, so nothing was done. But I know what I saw. That place is hell on earth, and it needs to be shut down before more people, more unsuspecting victims are sent there. And I want Freddy's body back. He saved my life.